second. He played 28 games at third. He played 10 at short. So hypothetically, he can be eligible almost anywhere also. He's lower down on the list. He was on pace for 10 homers and 20 stolen bases last year. You have an issue picking him up? Does he? I mean, he's over 30. You have an issue picking up?
How many RBIs is going to have? 40?
Yeah.
Maybe 50.
ATC
50
shows 44.
runs scored?
44.
But he's a guy you're gonna have on your bench. He's the last guy. He's the guy that's sub to put in when someone gets hurt. That's all. That's these guys are here. I mean, if these guys are your main middle infielders, then you have a real issue with your team.
Yeah, I'm taking Hampson. A shot at Hampson over Wendell because, by the way, Wendell's value over replacement is almost zero. Because I'm going to find somebody
Wendell
on the waiver wire.
I have him at minus $3.6 auction value for Wendell, 44 RPIs. So I'm going to pass. I do want to point out about Wendell, though, and a couple of other people. Wendell, I have Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Niko Goodrum, J.P. Crawford, just to rattle off a couple of guys that are below replacement level, meaning I would not draft them, but they will either be available for the bench or more likely on the waiver wire. And those are just a couple of names to know who can turn in, we're talking about 15 steals. They don't give you much else, but a lot of times you're looking on the waiver wire for a fill-in, and you need a fill-in for a certain category. So it's important to know the player pool.
Yeah.
And, of course, middle infield we know is the source of, or at least we talked about it, is the source of some stolen bases. So just good to know a couple of names, not to draft or anything. There's very little upside, but during the year, especially if they have a good schedule, they're playing at a good ballpark or against a crappy pitcher, just a couple of guys to know to pick up for the week or two to fill in, to know about the stolen bases.
I like Goodrum. I'm okay with him. I know he's 29 years old, or maybe he's going to be 30 this season. But he does have some pop in his bat.
Yes,
he could have 15 homers and 15 steals. He's going to bat 240.
Yep.
But to me, he's a player who hasn't been worn out yet. Like a guy he's a young 29. Kiner-Falefa, I don't know where he's going to qualify. That depends on how many games again. If it's 15 games, it's only third base. I think if it's 10 games, I think he gets the qualification that everybody wants. And J.P. Crawford is just he's somebody I think that you can take a shot at better upside instead of him. Plus, I don't really know what that Seattle lineup is really gonna look like yet. So
yeah,
I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, between the four, I actually agree with your pecking order. I think Goodrum is probably the best shot at something, but J.P. Crawford is rosterable. J.P. Crawford, what he's going to give you is he's going to give you at-bats. He's going to play shortstop for them. At least that is the plan right now. So from the start, if I had to draft somebody, of the four, I would pick Crawford. During the season, from a waiver wire standpoint, it might be Goodrum to fill in because he'll also give you some of that power as well to go along with it, where some of these other guys wouldn't. Kiner-Falefa was a good value last year, but that, of course, was only because he qualified at catcher. He's, I'm not going to say useless now, but his value is far lower. He's not as helpful to you anymore. Got a couple of questions from the mailbag, which we'll end with. Brian asks, in the early stages of a draft, when you're evaluating a pick and it's really close between a middle infielder and a corner infielder, do you lean towards a certain position for 2021? What say you, Rick?
And, I would be completely lying if I said that I had the player pool completely figured out first. But you do have to analyze the player pool in order to figure out where you're lacking. Sometimes it's first base, third base. Whichever is the most scarce position is the one you're going to want to go after. And it's clear to me it's not shortstop. So to me, if it's really close between a shortstop and a first baseman or a third baseman, then I'm taking the first baseman or third baseman. If it's a second baseman, I'm probably taking the second baseman.
Ruvain?
Up top, I'm probably going to be taking if one of the top second basemen are there, I guess you have to because the drop off is pretty steep. Shortstops, I'd wait, but I usually me and you, Ariel, we tend to go corner infield very early, and we tend to go middle infield late.
Yeah, the real answer is that it doesn't really matter, because if you're doing your pricing correct, you're really evaluating. It doesn't matter what the positions are. You should be accounting for any scarcity, if there is any, within your evaluations. I will say though that for drafts especially, it's not just about who's available there. It's what the replacement is, meaning if what I do is I work backwards. I take a look at who am I going to be getting later in the draft, in the 20th through 25th rounds? Who am I getting in the 15th through 20th rounds? And if you see that there's a large number of first basemen later in the draft that you think might be interesting, and there's fewer second basemen, well, that tells you what you need to do, right? It's the plan that you have for later. It's the foreseeing what you might do later on, and what the player pool looks like really tells you what to do up top. I think that's pretty much similar to what you said, Rick, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, you're looking at, and in my case, I'm looking for bigger upside. So, but still, it's the same kind of idea, because you have a value, but my value includes the upside.
Right. So you have some risk-adjusted value or so. I would just caution, though.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, I would caution though that just also depends. It not just depends on the position, but it depends on the stats. If that player up top is going to have is not going to have stolen bases, you don't want to be taking a middle infielder at that spot. You want a middle infielder to have some steals with you. So I would take the corner to leave room for a potential middle infielder later. So it's also balanced between the stats. Similar question from Alex, but he asked about later in the draft. When drafting your third middle infielder, meaning you've already have a second baseman and a shortstop, are you still bumping up second baseman at this point in the draft? For example, would you take Starlin Castro because he is a second base eligible player, even if there is a slightly better shortstop on the board? Similar answer, Rick?
No, I mean, I'm taking the better player at the end of the draft no matter what. So if when I'm filling in middle and corner, I'm not trying to figure out whether or not one of the players that I have is weaker at one position than the other. I'm taking the best player available and relying on the fact that I got it right before.
Yeah. Again, I have all my values baked in so that I'm indifferent between players. If a shortstop is better than a second baseman or vice versa, it's because I've already adjusted any scarcity in there. Then there's no question, right? You want to adjust values first.
It's fair.
Right. And by the way, just to give you a couple of metrics in terms of replacement level, I'm looking at some of the Z scores at the very bottom, the $1 players that you would get at the bottom. The middle infield position is at a Z score of minus 2.6 according to the player pool, right? It's a negative thing. So what I would do in calculating my values is all middle infielders get a 2.6 bump. Third base down to minus 3.3, which is similar to first base. Outfield, minus 3.57. Outfielder is more scarce than all the other positions, right? If you need to bump up, you're going to be bumping up outfielders more because you're taking 5 outfielders. Catcher, of course, far lower. Catcher, we're talking about in the high 6s, so it gets a tremendous bump more than anybody. So this is very different than the player pool from 10 years ago where you would see second base, shortstop, probably with the lowest one, and first base with something that you don't have to bump. Very different how it's changed. You just have to recognize that that's what the player pool is, that replacement value, no, it's first base. And maybe, Ruvain, that's why you and I tend to take the first baseman, third baseman a little bit more, because we're adjusting values here much more for first and third than second base short, much more than the market. That's probably why. Do you think that could be the case?
I agree, but I also think that toward the end of toward the end game of most drafts and most auctions, we are short the middle infielder for some reason. It always works out that way. We're always looking for the guy with the most steals because we usually find out that our team is lacking in steals. So I think that what we normally do is we look for the middle infielder with the most amount of steal potential, whether they're good or not, and it's a matter of whether we think they'll have playing time. If their playing time we see is there, and we think they're going to steal, usually we go for that middle infielder late in the draft.
Yeah, it's always okay, by the way, to have $1 players. If your second baseman is a $1 player, that's fine. It just means that you have some more value elsewhere. It's probably better to be a little bit more well-rounded, but injuries happen. You're going to be replacing people at any position. So, I wouldn't worry so much about which position you're getting something for. I'd worry more about the plan as to where you can plan your most values. Ruvain, quick injury update for this week. Go for it.
Okay, I got 3 players, and I have a trivia question following the 3 players. First, I have Gio Urshela. He is expected to be ready for opening day. It was announced he had elbow surgery in December, and all systems are go for him. JT Realmuto was dealing with a hip flexor strain at the end of last year. He said he feels 100%. He should be good to go for spring training. And Kirby Yates, the potential closer for the Blue Jays, completed his rehab process and has already thrown a series of bullpens. He had surgery in August 2020 after some bone chips were discovered in his right elbow. Now, the trivia question that I have, we were mentioning middle infield and we're mentioning stolen bases a lot. The middle infielder who may be moving out of the middle infield to the corner infield and gives a possibility for stolen bases at a corner infield spot is Keston Hiura. He may be moving to second base because of the recent signings by the Brewers. Can you name, in the last 5 years, 8 first basemen who had more than 10 stolen bases in the last 5 years? Can you name them?
Can I name all 8? There's no possible way I could do this on the spot. But Goldschmidt comes to mind immediately.
That's one. That's one.
Votto comes to mind. He had 12.
Not 5 years ago. That was longer.
Longer than that ago. Rizzo.
Rizzo is one.
Bellinger.
Bellinger is one.
Well done.
Freddie Freeman, he steals some.
Freddie Freeman is one. Our good friend Will Myers is one. Danny Santana did it in 2019. Right. He was eligible at first base.
Okay, he's eligible.
Marwin Gonzalez did it back in 2016.
Okay.
And another former Brewer who had multiple position eligibility everywhere, who was not drafted anywhere, Hernan Perez. He did it twice, and he was eligible at first base. So those guys at the end, at the middle infield, you may not want them, but they may have some value in them.
Right. Most of those that on that list, though, are a combo. They have second base eligibility, too, or Myers probably third base eligibility as well. But, yeah, you're right. There are very few true first basemen in that list, which is, I guess, all the more reason that you really do need some speed. Some speed. You don't have to get all your speed from middle infield, but there should be at least one slot. And Reuven and I usually do it that when we list our slots, we're talking we need a second baseman or middle infielder. We'll often write middle infield /speed. Because that's something we're always looking for. Any last comments about the middle infield player pool, Rick? Anything that you've observed or tidbits, jokes, whatever?
Well, on my way to no. I'll say you said it pretty good right now. I mean, stolen bases are in the DNA of every fantasy player, so you got to pay attention to those. And if you pick them up from the middle infield, great. If you're not getting them from the middle infield, make sure you get a 30 home run guy. Don't not get stolen bases for a guy who gets counting numbers.
Well, this has been a fantastic show, Rick. Really want to thank you for coming on. And you can always listen to him with his partner, Glenn Colton, on Sirius XM Radio, 10 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday, I think.
Yep.
I know because I play tennis on Tuesday nights, and when I get out of tennis, driving home, it's Colton the Wolfman for me. And you always do a good job entertaining and information. You get fantastic guests on all the time. So I enjoy that, and thank you for doing this. For how many years has this been now?
I have been doing Colton and the Wolfman. We have been doing it for 9 years. It was season 9, episode 43 this past week.
Can you tell us where we can, everyone listening can hear you more, read your stuff, follow you on Twitter?
Yeah, well, I don't write anymore. I don't write very often, at least, because we have an amazing crew at FantasyAlarm.com, led by the great Howard Bender. But just a fantastic team. I call them the family, the FAMILY. So we do have a great group there. So it's not necessary for me to write anymore. I write one piece a year for the draft guide in each baseball and football. I write a piece about knowing your projections and figuring out what your targets are for each different type of league. And for football, of course, I write the smart football column because I'm way more fantasy football than baseball, if you believe it or not. So you can find me at RickWolf1, or I'm readily available for access for anybody who has business issues or things in fantasy, because I really enjoy helping people build their businesses in fantasy much more than I do analyzing or broadcasting.
Awesome stuff. Ruvain, tell us about your stuff.
You can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates during the course of the offseason and during the course of the season. I also have a weekly article during season on Rotoballer updating injuries, and actually my first article will be coming out in the next couple of days.
Very cool. You can read my work over at Fangraphs at